The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the Afghan mountains as Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez adjusted her rifle scope for what felt like the 100th time. The seasoned sniper had been stationed with SEAL Team 6 for 18 months, but today felt different. Something in the air whispered of danger, and her instincts had never failed her before. Rodriguez grew up in a small Texas town where hunting was as natural as breathing. Her father, a retired Marine, taught her to shoot when she was barely tall enough to hold a rifle properly. By age 12, she could hit a tin can from 300 yards without breaking a sweat. Her steady hands and eagle eyes eventually caught the attention of military recruiters who saw potential in the quiet girl with the perfect aim. The SEALs around her moved with practiced silence through the rocky terrain. Commander Jake Sullivan, a 20-year veteran with more missions under his belt than anyone cared to count, had initially been skeptical about having a female sniper embedded with his unit. That skepticism vanished after Rodriguez saved his life during her first week, picking off an enemy fighter who had Sullivan dead in his crosshairs. Now, as they approached the suspected Taliban stronghold nestled between two towering peaks, Rodriguez felt the familiar calm that always settled over her before action. Her breathing slowed, her heartbeat steadied, and the world seemed to sharpen into crystal-clear focus. The intelligence reports indicated at least 15 enemy combatants were holed up in the compound below, armed with everything from assault rifles to rocket-propelled grenades. The team had been tracking this particular cell for 3 weeks. They were responsible for a series of devastating attacks on NATO supply convoys, killing dozens of soldiers and innocent civilians. Today would be payback time. But Rodriguez knew that in these mountains, one wrong move could turn the hunters into the hunted. Sullivan raised his fist, signaling the team to halt. Through her scope, Rodriguez could see movement in the compound's windows. Guards were posted at strategic points, their weapons glinting in the harsh mountain sunlight. She counted at least 8 targets from her position, each one potentially lethal to her teammates. The plan was simple in theory but deadly in execution. The SEALs would split into 2 groups, approaching from different angles while Rodriguez provided overwatch from her elevated position. Her job was to eliminate any threats that posed immediate danger to the advancing teams and to watch for reinforcements that might arrive from the surrounding area. As Rodriguez settled into her firing position, she reflected on the journey that brought her here, the years of training, the countless hours at the firing range, the physical and mental challenges that pushed her beyond what she thought possible. She remembered the doubting looks from male colleagues, the whispered comments about whether a woman belonged in special operations, and the burning determination that fueled her every achievement. Her radio crackled with Sullivan's voice. "Hawkeye, this is Alpha Leader. We're moving into position. Keep those eyes sharp up there." Rodriguez keyed her mic twice in acknowledgement, maintaining radio silence as protocol demanded. Through her scope, she watched the SEALs begin their careful advance down the mountainside. The compound below seemed almost peaceful in the afternoon light. Laundry hung from makeshift lines, and she could see someone tending to a small garden behind one of the buildings. It was moments like these that reminded her that even in war zones, people tried to live normal lives. But intelligence was clear. This place was a nest of killers who had forfeited their right to peace. Rodriguez shifted slightly, adjusting her position to get a better angle on the compound's main entrance. Her rifle, a customized M24 that she had personally modified and calibrated, felt like an extension of her body. Every scratch on the stock told a story. Every adjustment spoke of lessons learned in the field. The first sign of trouble came when she spotted a figure moving on the compound's roof, carrying what looked like a heavy machine gun. Through her scope, she could see him setting up a defensive position that would give him a clear field of fire on the SEALs' approach route. This wasn't part of the intelligence briefing. They weren't supposed to have that kind of firepower. Rodriguez felt her pulse quicken as she realized the mission had just become infinitely more dangerous. The enemy was better prepared than expected, and her teammates were walking into what could become a deadly trap. She pressed her eye closer to the scope, finger moving to the trigger guard as she prepared to engage the machine gunner. But before she could take the shot, movement caught her eye from another direction. More armed figures were emerging from buildings that intelligence had marked as empty. The compound wasn't just occupied, it was fortified and ready for a fight. Rodriguez grabbed her radio, breaking silence to warn her team of the unexpected resistance they were about to face. The peaceful mountain morning was about to explode into chaos, and Rodriguez knew that her skills would be tested like never before. As she watched the SEALs continue their approach, unaware of the full extent of the danger waiting for them, she made a silent promise that not one of her teammates would die on her watch. The hunter was about to become the guardian, and every shot would count. Rodriguez keyed her radio urgently. "Alpha Leader, this is Hawkeye. You've got heavy resistance up there. Machine gun nest on the main roof. Additional hostiles in buildings 2 and 4. This isn't what intelligence promised." Her voice remained steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Sullivan's response crackled back immediately. "Copy that, Hawkeye. We see them now. Can you take out the machine gunner?" The question carried the weight of 8 lives hanging in the balance. One well-placed burst from that machine gun could cut down half the SEAL team before they could find adequate cover. Through her scope, Rodriguez studied the machine gunner's position. He was roughly 600 yards away, elevated about 40 feet above the compound's main courtyard. The angle was tricky, and the target was partially concealed behind a concrete barrier. Worse yet, the afternoon sun was creating heat shimmer that would affect her bullet's trajectory. "I've got a partial on the MG. Stand by," Rodriguez whispered into her radio. She controlled her breathing, feeling her heartbeat slow to that familiar rhythm she'd trained herself to achieve under pressure. The world beyond her scope faded away until only the target remained in sharp focus. The machine gunner shifted slightly, exposing more of his torso as he adjusted his weapon's position. Rodriguez saw her opportunity and squeezed the trigger with surgical precision. The rifle's report echoed across the mountains, and through her scope, she watched the enemy fighter crumple behind his weapon. "MG down," she reported, already scanning for the next threat. But the compound had erupted into activity. Armed figures were running between buildings, taking defensive positions and shouting orders in Pashto. What should have been a quiet infiltration had become a full-scale firefight. The SEALs moved with deadly efficiency, using the terrain and their training to advance despite the heavy resistance. Rodriguez watched through her scope as Sullivan's team engaged targets near the compound's eastern wall, while the second team approached from the west. Her job now was to be their guardian angel, eliminating threats before they could harm her teammates. A muzzle flash from a second-story window caught her attention. An enemy fighter was taking aim at Petty Officer Martinez, who was providing cover fire for his advancing teammates. Rodriguez didn't hesitate. Her second shot shattered the window and silenced the threat permanently. "Nice shot, Hawkeye." Martinez's voice came through the radio, breathing heavily but alive. But the enemy wasn't finished. Rodriguez spotted movement on another rooftop, someone carrying what looked like an RPG launcher. The rocket-propelled grenade could devastate the SEAL teams if it found its mark. She swung her rifle toward the new threat, but the fighter ducked behind cover before she could get a clear shot. The battle intensified as more enemy combatants joined the fight. Rodriguez found herself engaging multiple targets, her rifle barking repeatedly as she protected her advancing teammates. Each shot had to count. There was no room for error when lives depended on her accuracy. Through her scope, she watched Sullivan's team breach the compound's main gate, while the second team scaled the western wall. The SEALs moved like shadows, deadly and efficient even under heavy fire. But Rodriguez could see they were outnumbered. Intelligence had estimated 15 enemy fighters, but she had already counted more than 20 distinct targets. Her radio crackled with urgent chatter. "Taking heavy fire from the north building. Need suppression on that position." Rodriguez immediately shifted her aim, identifying 3 enemy fighters who had set up an ambush position. Her shots drove them back into cover, buying the SEALs precious seconds to advance. The RPG fighter reappeared, and this time, Rodriguez was ready. As he shouldered the launcher, she put a bullet through his chest, sending the deadly weapon clattering harmlessly to the ground. The explosion that could have killed half the SEAL team never came. Minutes felt like hours as the firefight continued. Rodriguez's ammunition was running low, and she could see that the SEALs were pinned down in multiple locations throughout the compound. The enemy had prepared for this assault better than anyone had anticipated, and they were fighting with the desperation of cornered animals. Then she saw something that made her blood run cold. Movement on a distant ridge suggested that enemy reinforcements were approaching. A convoy of vehicles was winding its way up the mountain road, and through her scope she could see armed fighters preparing to join the battle. Alpha Leader, you've got company coming up the access road. Estimate 15 to 20 additional hostiles. ETA 5 minutes, Rodriguez reported, her voice tight with concern. The SEALs were already outnumbered, and reinforcements could turn a difficult situation into a disaster. Sullivan's response was immediate and decisive. Roger that. We need to finish this fast. All teams accelerate the timeline. Hawkeye, keep those reinforcements off our backs as long as possible. Rodriguez knew what that meant. She would have to engage a much larger force with limited ammunition, while her teammates completed their mission inside the compound. The odds were stacked against them, but failure wasn't an option. Too many lives depended on their success, and the enemy fighters they were hunting had too much blood on their hands to be allowed to escape. As the first vehicles of the enemy convoy came into rifle range, Rodriguez prepared for the fight of her life. Her teammates were counting on her to hold the line, and she had never let them down before. Today wouldn't be the first time, no matter what it cost her. The convoy of enemy vehicles snaked up the mountain road like a deadly serpent, dust clouds marking their rapid approach. Rodriguez counted at least 4 pickup trucks loaded with armed fighters, their weapons gleaming in the harsh afternoon sun. She had maybe 3 minutes before they reached the compound and turned the tide of battle against her outnumbered teammates. Her ammunition count was critical, only 12 rounds left in her current magazine. With 2 spare mags remaining, every shot would have to be perfect, and she would need to make tactical decisions about which targets posed the greatest immediate threat to the SEAL teams fighting inside the compound. Through her radio, she could hear the intense firefight continuing below. Sullivan's voice cut through the static. "Hawkeye, we're taking casualties down here. Peterson's hit and we're running low on ammo. How much time do we have before those reinforcements arrive?" Rodriguez checked her watch and estimated the convoy's speed. 2 minutes, maybe less. They're moving fast and they look organized. She kept her voice steady, but inside she felt the weight of responsibility pressing down like a physical force. 32 lives depended on her ability to hold off a superior force with limited resources. The lead vehicle came into optimal range, and Rodriguez made her choice. Rather than targeting the fighters in the truck beds, she aimed for the driver. Her bullet punched through the windshield and the pickup truck swerved wildly before crashing into the rocky mountainside. The fighters in the back were thrown from the vehicle, several clearly injured from the impact, but the other 3 vehicles kept coming, and now they knew a sniper was watching the road. The second truck began weaving erratically to make targeting more difficult, while fighters in the third vehicle started scanning the surrounding ridges with binoculars, searching for Rodriguez's position. She shifted her aim to the second vehicle, leading the target as it zigzagged up the mountain road. The shot was incredibly difficult, a moving target at extreme range with crosswinds affecting trajectory. Rodriguez controlled her breathing, found her natural pause between heartbeats, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck the truck's engine block, sending steam and smoke billowing from under the hood. The vehicle coasted to a stop, its engine destroyed, but the fighters inside were still very much alive and armed. They began using the disabled truck as cover while returning fire in Rodriguez's general direction. The third and fourth vehicles had reached the compound's perimeter, and armed fighters were pouring out like angry hornets from a disturbed nest. Rodriguez counted at least 15 fresh enemy combatants, all carrying automatic weapons and moving with military precision. These weren't untrained insurgents. They were experienced fighters who knew their business. Her radio erupted with urgent calls for support. "Hawkeye, we've got fresh hostiles coming through the main gate. They're trying to flank us from the east side." Rodriguez immediately swung her rifle toward the compound, identifying the new threats as they attempted to surround the SEAL teams. But engaging targets in the compound meant taking her attention away from the fighters on the road, who were already beginning to advance on foot toward the battle. She was facing an impossible tactical situation. Too many threats in too many locations for one sniper to handle effectively. Rodriguez made a split-second decision that went against every tactical manual she'd ever studied. Instead of trying to engage multiple small targets, she would focus on creating maximum chaos among the enemy reinforcements. She aimed for the fuel tank of the third vehicle, which was still running and positioned near a group of advancing fighters. The armor-piercing round punched through the truck's thin metal skin and ignited the gasoline inside. The explosion was spectacular, sending flames and twisted metal flying in all directions. Several enemy fighters were caught in the blast and the rest dove for cover as burning fuel rained down around them. The psychological effect was exactly what Rodriguez had hoped for. The advancing fighters hesitated, suddenly aware that the sniper watching them was willing and able to turn their own vehicles into weapons against them. That moment of hesitation gave the SEAL teams precious time to reposition and consolidate their forces. But Rodriguez's ammunition situation was becoming critical. She was down to her last magazine, and the firefight showed no signs of ending soon. Through her scope, she could see that the SEALs had secured most of the compound's main buildings, but they were still facing fierce resistance from enemy fighters who had barricaded themselves in the northern section. Her radio crackled with Sullivan's voice. "Hawkeye, we found the HVT, but he's got hostages. We need precision support to end this without civilian casualties." The high-value target they had come to capture was using innocent people as human shields, creating a situation that required surgical accuracy rather than overwhelming firepower. Rodriguez adjusted her scope's focus, studying the building where Sullivan indicated the target was located. Through a second-story window, she could see movement, armed figures positioned near what appeared to be bound civilians. The range was extreme, the angle was difficult, and any mistake could result in innocent deaths. The enemy reinforcements had regrouped from the vehicle explosion and were beginning their advance again, this time moving more carefully and using cover more effectively. Rodriguez realized she was facing a tactical nightmare. She needed to provide precision support for the hostage situation while simultaneously holding off a superior force of enemy reinforcements. As she prepared for what might be the most challenging shots of her career, Rodriguez reflected on her father's words from years ago. "Mija, when everything goes wrong and the odds are stacked against you, that's when you find out who you really are." Today, she was about to discover exactly what kind of warrior she had become. The afternoon sun was beginning to sink toward the western peaks, casting long shadows across the battlefield. Time was running out for everyone involved, and Rodriguez knew that the next few minutes would determine whether her teammates went home alive or in body bags. Rodriguez felt sweat beading on her forehead despite the mountain chill as she studied the hostage situation through her scope. The building's second floor held at least 3 armed fighters positioned around 4 civilians, who appeared to be local villagers. The high-value target, identified by intelligence as Taliban commander Yusuf Nazir, was clearly visible holding an assault rifle to a young woman's head. The tactical problem was nightmare fuel for any sniper. She needed to eliminate the immediate threats without harming the hostages, all while enemy reinforcements continued their advance from the road. Through her earpiece, she could hear Sullivan's team positioning themselves for a coordinated assault, but they needed her to remove the shooters who had clear fields of fire on the building's entrance. "Hawkeye, we need those windows cleared in 60 seconds. Sullivan's voice carried the tension of a man watching his options disappear. "The reinforcements are almost in position to cut off our extraction route." Rodriguez made her choice. The fighter positioned at the left window was partially exposed, leaning out to get a better angle on the SEALs below. The shot was nearly 900 yards at a severe downward angle, with crosswinds gusting between the mountain peaks. She adjusted her scope's elevation and windage, factoring in the complex ballistics of the extreme range shot. Her breathing slowed to the familiar rhythm that had become second nature over thousands of hours of training. The crosshairs settled on her target's center mass, and she gently squeezed the trigger. The bullet's flight time felt eternal, but through her scope she watched the enemy fighter drop from view. "Left window clear," she reported, already shifting her aim to the second threat. But this fighter had learned from his teammate's fate and was keeping himself well concealed behind the window frame. Rodriguez could see only a small portion of his shoulder and his rifle barrel protruding into her field of view. The advancing reinforcements were getting closer, and she could hear their shouts echoing off the mountain walls. They had spread out into a skirmish line and were using fire and movement tactics to close the distance. Rodriguez estimated she had perhaps 2 minutes before they reached effective rifle range. Through her scope, she watched the second fighter in the hostage building shift position, exposing more of himself as he tried to get a better shooting angle on the SEAL team. Rodriguez held her breath and took the shot. The bullet struck true and another threat was eliminated. But as she swung her rifle toward the third fighter, disaster struck. Her movement had exposed her position to the advancing reinforcements, and incoming fire began striking the rocks around her. Bullets whined overhead and shattered stone fragments that stung her face and arms. Rodriguez rolled behind better cover, her heart hammering as she realized how exposed she had become. The enemy reinforcements had pinpointed her location and were concentrating their fire on her position. She could hear bullets ricocheting off rocks just inches from her head. Her radio erupted with Sullivan's voice. "Hawkeye, what's your status? We're hearing heavy fire from your position." She could hear genuine concern in the commander's voice, knowing that losing their overwatch would doom the entire mission. "Taking heavy contact, but I'm still operational," Rodriguez replied, though she wasn't sure how long that would remain true. She had managed to maintain her grip on her rifle during the scramble for cover, but she was now pinned down with limited options for repositioning. Through a small gap in the rocks, she could see the third fighter in the hostage building. He was holding his position near the civilians, clearly waiting for the SEAL assault that he knew was coming. But Rodriguez's angle was terrible from her current position, and any shot she attempted would carry enormous risk of hitting the innocent people nearby. The incoming fire intensified as more enemy reinforcements reached effective range. Rodriguez could hear at least 3 different automatic weapons hammering her position, and larger caliber rounds suggested they had brought a machine gun into the fight. Staying in her current location meant certain death, but moving would expose her to even more enemy fire. Then she heard something that made her blood run cold. Sullivan's voice on the radio. "All teams were compromised. Enemy reinforcements have our extraction route blocked. We need immediate support or we're not making it home." Rodriguez realized that her teammates were trapped. The reinforcements she had been unable to stop had reached their objective and cut off the SEAL team's planned withdrawal route. Unless something changed dramatically in the next few minutes, the entire mission would end in disaster. Fighting against her survival instincts, Rodriguez made a decision that went against every principle of sniper tactics. She would have to abandon her concealed position and move to a location where she could effectively engage both the hostage situation and the reinforcements. It was tactically insane, but her teammates needed her support more than she needed her own safety. She grabbed her remaining ammunition and prepared to move. The new position she had identified would give her better angles on multiple targets, but it would also expose her to fire from at least 2 different directions. It was a calculated risk that could save her teammates or get her killed. As bullets continued to pound her current position, Rodriguez took a deep breath and prepared to make the dash that would either save the mission or end her life. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "Sometimes the right choice and the safe choice are 2 different things, mija. A warrior knows the difference." The time for safe choices had passed. Rodriguez gathered her courage, checked her rifle one final time, and prepared to move into what could very well be the last position she would ever occupy. But if it saved her teammates, the sacrifice would be worth it. She could hear the SEALs engaging targets inside the compound, their ammunition running low as they fought against overwhelming odds. Time was running out for everyone, and Rodriguez knew that her next actions would determine who lived and who died in these unforgiving mountains. Rodriguez sprinted across the exposed rocky terrain as bullets whined around her like deadly hornets. Her boots slipped on loose shale, and she nearly lost her footing as she dove behind a large boulder that would serve as her final fighting position. The new location gave her clear lines of sight to both the hostage building and the advancing enemy reinforcements, but it also made her visible to hostile fire from multiple directions. She had barely settled into her new position when incoming rounds began striking the boulder's surface, sending chips of stone flying. Rodriguez pressed herself against the rock and tried to control her breathing while assessing her tactical situation. She had 7 rounds left in her current magazine and 2 full magazines remaining. Against the odds she was facing, it might as well have been a handful of pebbles. Through her scope, she could see the third fighter in the hostage building had moved closer to the windows. Apparently emboldened by the heavy fire that had driven her from her original position, the Taliban commander Nazir was visible behind him, still holding his human shield while shouting orders to his remaining men. Her radio crackled with urgent chatter. "Hawkeye, we're in position for the assault, but we need that third window cleared. Peterson's bleeding out and we can't wait much longer." Rodriguez could hear the desperation in Sullivan's voice. The SEAL medic was doing everything possible to keep their wounded teammate alive, but they needed to complete the mission and extract immediately. Rodriguez steadied her rifle against the boulder and acquired her target. The third fighter was partially concealed, with only his head and shoulder visible as he aimed down at the SEAL positions. The shot was technically possible, but the margin for error was non-existent. If she missed or if the bullet deflected off the window frame, it could strike one of the hostages. She controlled her breathing and found that familiar zone where the world narrowed to just her target and the crosshairs. The fighter shifted slightly, exposing more of his torso as he tracked a SEAL moving below. Rodriguez squeezed the trigger, and through her scope she watched the man collapse. "Third window clear. You're good to go," she reported, already shifting her aim toward the advancing reinforcements. But as she did, she saw something that made her heart skip a beat. One of the enemy fighters approaching from the road was carrying what looked like a Dragunov sniper rifle, and he was scanning the ridgeline methodically, searching for her position. The enemy sniper was good. Rodriguez could tell by the way he moved and positioned himself that he had training and experience. He found a stable shooting position behind a cluster of rocks and began glassing her area with his scope. It would only be a matter of seconds before he spotted her. Rodriguez faced an immediate tactical decision. She could engage the enemy sniper, but doing so would reveal her exact position to the other advancing fighters, or she could focus on the larger group of reinforcements and hope to eliminate enough of them to break their assault. Either choice carried enormous risks. The decision was made for her when muzzle flash erupted from the enemy sniper's position. The bullet struck the boulder inches from her head, showering her with rock fragments and ringing her ears with the sound of the impact. The enemy shooter had found her, and now it was a deadly game of cat and mouse between two skilled marksmen. Rodriguez rolled to a different position behind the boulder as another enemy bullet struck where she had been lying moments before. She could hear the distinctive crack of the Dragunov rifle, different from the assault rifles being fired by the other advancing fighters. This enemy sniper was her immediate priority. As long as he was active, she couldn't effectively support her teammates or engage the other threats. She risked a quick look around the boulder's edge, using her scope to locate the enemy sniper's position. He had shifted location after his shots, smart enough to know that staying in one place too long meant death. Through her scope, Rodriguez scanned the area where she had seen his muzzle flash, looking for any sign of movement or reflection that would give away his new position. A glint of sunlight off glass caught her attention. The enemy sniper had positioned himself behind a different set of rocks, and she could just barely see the objective lens of his scope reflecting the afternoon sun. The range was approximately 700 yards across a valley with significant elevation differences and unpredictable wind patterns. Rodriguez knew she would only get one shot before the enemy sniper repositioned again, miss, and he would have her location pinpointed while she remained exposed. The pressure was incredible. Her teammates were depending on her support, enemy reinforcements were advancing, and now she was locked in single combat with another skilled marksman. She steadied her breathing and settled her crosshairs on the barely visible target. The wind was gusting unpredictably between the mountain peaks, making trajectory calculations extremely difficult. Rodriguez had to estimate the windage correction based on years of experience shooting in similar conditions. Just as she was about to fire, movement in her peripheral vision caught her attention. The main group of enemy reinforcements had reached the compound's outer perimeter and were beginning to engage the SEAL teams directly. She could hear the increased volume of gunfire, echoing off the mountain walls as her teammates found themselves under attack from multiple directions, simultaneously. Her radio erupted with desperate calls for support. "Hawkeye, we're being overrun from the east side. We need immediate suppression fire on those positions." But Rodriguez was pinned down by the enemy sniper, unable to provide the support her teammates desperately needed. She realized that defeating the enemy marksman wasn't just about her own survival anymore. It was the key to saving her entire team. As long as that Dragunov rifle was active, she couldn't move freely or provide effective overwatch. Her teammates were fighting for their lives below while she was trapped in a deadly duel that could only end. With one sniper walking away, Rodriguez made her peace with the situation and prepared to take the most important shot of her career. Everything else faded away except the distant target and the need to protect the men who had become her brothers in arms. Time slowed to a crawl as Rodriguez settled into her final shot. The enemy sniper's scope glinted in the distance, and she could sense him preparing to fire. This would be a simultaneous engagement. Two skilled marksmen firing at each other across 700 yards of hostile terrain. Only one would survive the exchange. Her crosshairs settled on the barely visible target, and Rodriguez began her trigger squeeze with the smooth, steady pressure that had become automatic after thousands of hours of training. But just as she reached the trigger's breakpoint, an impossible opportunity presented itself. Through her scope, she saw the enemy sniper shift his position slightly, and suddenly his rifle became clearly visible. Not just the scope or barrel, but the entire weapon silhouetted against the rocky background. Rodriguez realized she had a shot at the rifle itself. A target so small and at such an extreme range that attempting it bordered on insanity. But something in her mind clicked into place with crystalline clarity. Her father's voice echoed from her childhood. Sometimes you don't shoot the man, mija. Sometimes you shoot what makes the man dangerous. In that instant, Rodriguez made a decision that would become legend among special operations forces worldwide. Instead of aiming for the enemy sniper's center mass, she adjusted her point of aim to the rifle's action, the mechanical heart of the weapon that would render it completely useless if destroyed. The target was perhaps 8 inches wide at a distance where most snipers would be challenged to hit a man-sized silhouette. Rodriguez controlled her breathing one final time, feeling her heartbeat slow to that familiar rhythm that had never failed her. The mountain wind seemed to still, and the sounds of battle faded to a distant murmur. Her world contracted to just the crosshairs, the target, and the absolute certainty that this shot had to be perfect. She squeezed the trigger with surgical precision, and her rifle bucked against her shoulder. Through her scope, she watched the impossible happen. Her bullet struck the enemy sniper's rifle directly in the action, and the weapon literally exploded in his hands. The Dragunov rifle snapped cleanly in two, its metal components flying in different directions as the bullet's kinetic energy tore the weapon apart. The enemy sniper was thrown backward by the force of his destroyed rifle, clearly alive but completely disarmed and probably suffering from severe shock and minor injuries from the weapon's explosive failure. Rodriguez had achieved something that defied ballistic probability. She had shot an enemy rifle clean in two at extreme range under combat conditions. But there was no time to celebrate the impossible shot. Her radio was alive with urgent calls from the compound below. "Hawkeye, we've got the HVT secured, but we need immediate support. The reinforcements are massing for a final assault." Rodriguez immediately shifted her focus to the larger battle. With the enemy sniper neutralized, she could now provide effective overwatch for her teammates. Through her scope, she could see enemy fighters positioning themselves for a coordinated attack on the SEAL positions. Her remaining ammunition would have to count for everything. She began engaging targets with systematic precision, each shot carefully chosen for maximum tactical impact. A fighter carrying an RPG fell to her rifle, the deadly rocket launcher clattering harmlessly to the ground. An enemy commander directing the assault collapsed as Rodriguez's bullet found its mark, sending the attacking force into confusion as they lost their tactical coordination. Sullivan's voice came through the radio with barely controlled relief. "Outstanding shooting. Hawkeye, we're seeing the pressure lift down here. Keep it up. We're moving to the extraction point." Rodriguez continued to provide covering fire as the SEALs fought their way out of the compound with their high-value prisoner. Her ammunition was nearly exhausted, but each remaining round found its target. The enemy reinforcements, demoralized by the loss of their sniper and leaders, began to break contact and withdraw. As the sun dipped toward the western peaks, painting the mountains in shades of gold and red, the battle finally came to an end. Rodriguez could see her teammates moving steadily toward the extraction point, carrying their wounded comrade and their captured objective. The mission that had seemed doomed to failure had become a tactical victory against impossible odds. Her radio crackled one final time with Sullivan's voice. "Hawkeye, words can't express what you did for us today. That shot you made. I've never seen anything like it in 20 years of combat. You saved every life on this team." Rodriguez felt a profound sense of exhaustion wash over her as the adrenaline finally began to fade. She had fired her last round and accomplished something that would be talked about in military circles for years to come. But more importantly, she had kept her promise, Khan. Not one of her teammates had died on her watch. As she prepared to move to the extraction point, Rodriguez reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a small town in Texas to the mountains of Afghanistan, from doubting colleagues to grateful teammates who now called her their guardian angel, she had proven that skill, determination, and courage could overcome any odds. The story of the female sniper who shot an enemy rifle clean in two would become part of special operations folklore, inspiring a new generation of warriors who would know that impossible was just another word for the things they hadn't accomplished yet. Rodriguez had written her name in history with a single, perfect shot that saved her brothers in arms and completed a mission that had seemed destined for disaster. Years later, when young soldiers asked Rodriguez about that legendary shot in the Afghan mountains, she would simply smile and repeat her father's words. Sometimes you don't shoot the man. Sometimes you shoot what makes the man dangerous. The helicopter extraction went smoothly, with Rodriguez providing overwatch until the last possible moment before boarding. As the aircraft lifted off from the hostile valley, she could see the abandoned compound growing smaller below, the scene of a battle that had tested every skill she possessed and every ounce of courage she could muster. Back at base, the debriefing was unlike anything Rodriguez had ever experienced. Intelligence officers, ballistics experts, and senior commanders all wanted to understand exactly how she had achieved the impossible shot that destroyed an enemy rifle at such extreme range. The captured Taliban commander had provided valuable intelligence about planned attacks, making the mission a strategic success that would save countless lives. But for Rodriguez, the real victory was much simpler. Every member of her SEAL team had made it home alive. Peterson recovered fully from his wounds and would return to active duty within 6 months. The brotherhood of warriors who had once questioned whether a woman belonged in special operations now considered her family, bound together by shared combat and mutual trust forged under fire. The official after-action report would document the tactical details of the engagement, noting Rodriguez's exceptional marksmanship and tactical decision-making under extreme pressure. But it could never capture the full scope of what happened in those mountains, how a young woman from a small Texas town had become a legend through skill, determination, and an unwavering commitment to protecting her teammates. Commander Sullivan recommended Rodriguez for the Silver Star, citing her heroic actions and the impossible shot that had turned the tide of battle. During the award ceremony, as she stood at attention while the medal was pinned to her uniform, Rodriguez thought about her father watching, from the audience with tears of pride in his eyes. The shot that snapped an enemy rifle clean in two would be analyzed and discussed in military academies for years to come. Ballistics experts calculated that the precision required was beyond what most computers could achieve. Yet Rodriguez had accomplished it with iron will and perfect technique under the most stressful conditions imaginable. But perhaps the most important recognition came from her fellow SEALs, who had seen her courage firsthand and knew that their lives had been saved by her extraordinary skill. They would carry the memory of that day with them forever, knowing that when everything went wrong and the odds were impossible, Rodriguez had found a way to bring them all home safely. The mountains of Afghanistan had tested her limits and revealed her true character. She had proven that warriors are not defined by their gender or background, but by their willingness to stand between their brothers in danger, no matter the cost. In that moment of perfect clarity, when her crosshairs settled on an impossible target, Rodriguez had written herself into the annals of military history. The legend of the shot that defied physics and saved a SEAL team would inspire future generations of snipers and special operations forces. But for Rodriguez, it would always be remembered as the day she kept her promise to never let a teammate die on her watch, one impossible shot at a time.